At my retirement party after 37 years, I watched my daughter-in-law slip a clear liquid into my champagne. She thought she was subtle, but I smiled and swapped our glasses the moment she turned away. She believed she was destroying my reputation, but the hidden cameras were recording every second. Tonight was not about ending my career. It was about exposing the woman who thought a 62-year-old widow was too weak to fight back. My name is Margaret O'Connell, but everyone at Harbour Light Assurance has called me Maggie for 37 years. Tonight, however, I feel less like a seasoned employee and more like a prop on a stage set by my son and his wife. I am sitting in the center of the grand ballroom at the Lakeview Hotel in Riverton, Ohio. I am 62 years old, and my knees ache beneath the table. But my mind is sharper than the crystal flutes lining the white tablecloths. The air is thick with the scent of expensive lilies and roasted duck. Amber lights reflect off the silverware, creating a dazzling, dizzying effect. My colleagues are whispering near the open bar. I see the board of directors and the HR manager nodding politely at jokes I cannot hear. It is supposed to be a celebration of my loyalty, but the atmosphere feels suffocating. I am the reason everyone is here, yet I feel entirely invisible. My son, Ethan, is darting around the room like a politician seeking votes. He is handsome in his navy suit, but his eyes are anxious. He is not introducing me to the regional vice presidents. Instead, he is parading his wife, Kayla. She looks impeccable in a silk dress that costs more than my car. "This is Kayla," I hear him say, his voice carrying over the low hum of jazz. "She is a brand specialist. She organized all of this." He beams at her while I sit alone at the table of honor. I look down at my plate. They placed me at a central table. Yes, but slightly off to the side. I am positioned just enough to be seen by the crowd, but far enough away that no one feels obligated to engage me in conversation. I am a statue. I am a relic of the old company culture that they are eager to retire along with me. A waiter approaches with a silver tray of champagne for the toast. As he moves to the serving station behind me, I glance at the large decorative mirror on the wall. The angle is perfect. I see Kayla approach the tray while the waiter is distracted by a guest. She reaches into her clutch. Her movements are quick and practiced. She pulls out a small, unlabeled vial. With her body turned to block the view of the room, she uncorks it and tips a clear liquid into the flute that bears a little card with the name Maggie written in elegant calligraphy. I watch her reflection intently. Her manicured fingers are trembling just a little, a tiny betrayal of her nerves. But when she turns her head slightly, her profile shows a perfect, frozen smile. She darts a glance toward Ethan, who is busy laughing at a joke made by the CFO. He does not see her. No one sees her. Except me. A year ago, this would have broken my heart. I would have gasped or cried or doubted my own eyes. But tonight, my pulse does not even quicken. I feel a cold, steel-like calm settle in my chest. I knew she would do this. In fact, I counted on it. I glance up at the ceiling corner. The red light of the security camera blinks rhythmically. I chose this specific table because I knew that camera captures this exact angle. She thinks she is erasing me, but she is writing her own confession. The room quiets down. Someone clinks a spoon against a glass. Speech. Speech for the woman of the hour. A colleague shouts. Kayla picks up the tray. She walks toward me, her heels clicking on the parquet floor. She looks the picture of the devoted daughter-in-law serving the matriarch. "Here you go." "Mom," she says, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I made sure they poured the good stuff for you. She holds the tray out. The tainted glass is closest to me. I reach out, my hand shaking intentionally. I let my fingers fumble against the stem of the glass. Oh. My clumsy hands, I say, letting out a breathless, self-deprecating laugh. In the confusion of my clumsiness, my hand darts past the intended glass and grabs the one next to it. At the same time, I nudge the tray so she has to adjust her grip, bringing the tainted glass closer to herself. I take the safe glass. She is left holding the one meant for me. I smile at her, a genuine, warm smile that does not reach my eyes. Inside, a voice screams in triumph. All right, Kayla, your turn. If you want to understand why I let my daughter-in-law go this far, we have to go back 1 year. I was living, as I still do, in my small 2-bedroom house in Northwood Heights. It is the kind of neighborhood where the fences are chain link and people park their work trucks on the front lawn. It is not glamorous, but it is paid for. My life was not always this quiet. I was once the devoted wife of a mechanic named Joel, a man who was charming until the bills came due, when he left me for a younger woman and a mountain of gambling debt. I was left with a 5-year-old boy and a terrifying emptiness in my bank account. I took the job at Harbour Light Assurance, not because I had a passion for filing claims, but because it offered health insurance. I raised Ethan alone. I was the mother who skipped lunch to pay for soccer cleats. I was the woman who wore the same winter coat for 12 years so he could have the new textbooks. For decades, I turned down opportunities. My boss offered me a chance to take night classes for a management role. But I said no because I needed to be home to help Ethan with his homework. I refused a transfer to a bigger branch because I did not want to uproot him from his friends. I defined myself as the backstage crew of someone else's life. I was the lighting and the sound, never the actor. When Ethan graduated and landed a management position at Riverton Capital Group, I cried. He looked so handsome in his suits, so far removed from the grease-stained garage of his father. I thought my work was done. I thought I had been rewarded. Then came the first mention of her. She is in marketing. Mom? Ethan told me over the phone, his voice thick with infatuation. She is very ambitious, very smart. You will like her. I was excited. I truly was. I imagined a daughter I never had, someone to go shopping with, someone to share the family recipes with. But then came the rooftop bar. I arrived early, wearing my best navy dress. It was a modest piece I had bought at an outlet store 3 years prior. I felt elegant until I stepped out of the elevator. The crowd was young, polished, and terrifyingly trendy. Then I saw Kayla. She was sitting with her back to the view, sipping a cocktail that cost more than my hourly wage. When Ethan introduced us, her eyes did a quick, vertical scan of my body. It lasted less than a second, but I felt it. She priced my shoes, my handbag, and my haircut. And she found the total lacking. It is so cute that you have been at the same place for 37 years, she said after we sat down, swirling the olive in her glass. Her tone was polite, but the subtext was sharp. If it were me, I think I would just go crazy doing the same thing every day. I need growth. You know, I forced a smile, tucking my scuffed purse under the table. Well, it gave Ethan a good start, I said. Right, she replied, patting Ethan's hand with a possessive grip. And look how well he turned out, despite everything. The insults were small, like paper cuts, At their wedding, 6 months later, I walked into the reception hall and realized I was seated at table 19. It was on the very edge of the room, near the swinging doors of the kitchen. The center of the room was filled with Kayla's family and their wealthy friends. I sat next to a distant cousin and a former college roommate of Ethan's, who spent the whole night checking his phone. Ethan did not notice. He was dancing in the center of the room, blinded by the spotlight, unaware that his mother had been pushed into the shadows. That night, I lay in my bed in the silence of my empty house. I thought about the 37 years of packed lunches and unpaid overtime. I felt a strange sensation in my chest, a heavy, cold realization. I had sacrificed everything to give my son a better life. But my sacrifice did not make me a hero to them. It just made me convenient. It made me a stepping stone that they had already walked over. After the wedding, the Sunday dinners I cherished began to vanish. When they did come over, the air in my kitchen felt different. It used to smell of roasting garlic and comfort, but now it smelled of judgment. During one of their rare visits, Kayla walked into the kitchen and immediately wrinkled her nose. She walked to the window and threw it open, letting the cold autumn draft sweep in. "Oh, Maggie," she said, fanning the air in front of her face. "That oil smell, it just clings to my hair for days. Have you ever thought about downsizing? There are these lovely senior living apartments downtown. They have a central cafeteria, so you wouldn't even have to cook." I looked down at the pot roast I had spent 4 hours preparing. "I like cooking, Kayla, and I like my home." Ethan, who was leaning against the counter checking his emails, did not defend the meal he had grown up loving. Instead, he nodded, his voice taking on a tone I did not recognize. "She has a point. Mom, why do you need 3 bedrooms? You are all alone here," he said, not looking up from his screen. "The market is hot right now. If you sell, the money would make you very comfortable. And, well, it would help secure things for us later, too." He said us. He meant them. A few weeks later, Kayla presented me with a new smartphone. "It was a gift," she said, but it felt more like a leash. She sat next to me on the sofa, her perfume overpowering the room, and tapped the screen impatiently as I tried to navigate the icons with my stiff fingers. "No, Maggie, swipe up." She sighed, rolling her eyes playfully at Ethan. "We really have to drag you into the 21st century, don't we?" She held up her own phone. I smiled, feeling foolish. Later that night, I saw the picture on her social media story. She had captioned it, "Training my analog mother-in-law. Saint patience required." There was a laughing emoji next to it. I stared at the screen until the light blurred. The erasure of my presence happened slowly. When I visited their pristine beige house the following month, I noticed the living room had been rearranged. The large oak console table was gone, replaced by a sleek, modern glass shelf holding abstract sculptures. I looked for the framed photo of Ethan and me from his college graduation, the one where he was beaming with his arm around my shoulder. I found it eventually. It had been moved to the hallway leading to the guest bathroom, hung in a shadow where the light bulb barely reached. It was effectively invisible. The humiliation became public at a barbecue hosted by Kayla's parents. Her father, a loud man who owned a chain of car dealerships, asked me what I did for a living. Before I could open my mouth to explain my role in processing complex liability claims, Kayla interjected, "Oh, Ethan's mum works in the filing department of a small insurance place, she said, handing me a paper plate with a condescending smile. She has been there forever. It is very stable. I think it is adorable, really. A simple life for a simple woman. She made loyalty sound like stagnation. She made 37 years of hard work sound like a failure of ambition. Ethan was standing right there. He was sipping a beer, laughing as Kayla launched into a story about one of her senile clients who could not understand a digital contract. I swear. Kayla laughed, looking around the circle of her friends. Old people just lose the plot. It is like talking to toddlers. Ethan laughed with them. He did not look at me. He did not seem to realize that his mother, sitting 3 feet away, was one of those old people in his wife's eyes. I tried to reclaim a piece of myself. One afternoon, while helping Ethan rake leaves in their backyard, I mentioned the flyer I had seen at the community center. I was thinking. I started, pausing to catch my breath. I might take a creative writing class. Just for fun. I have always wanted to tell stories. Ethan barely glanced up from the pile of leaves. Writing. That sounds nice. Mom, Kayla, who was watching from the patio door with a glass of wine, let out a sharp, short laugh. Creative writing, she called out. That is cute. Maggie. Poetry about cats, just... Please don't write about us. Okay, we don't need our private lives in some amateur memoir. After that day, the phone calls stopped almost entirely. My phone would buzz with short, impersonal text messages. Kayla says we are busy this weekend. Kayla thinks we should skip Thanksgiving this year. Kayla says. My son's voice was disappearing, replaced by her dictates. I sat in my kitchen, the silence of the house pressing against my ears. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I told myself this was just how modern families worked. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was becoming an inconvenience. I was a relic to be managed, a problem to be solved, and a resource to be harvested. It started with a fog that settled behind my eyes, heavy and grey. I would walk into the kitchen and forget why I was there. I would lose my car keys, only to find them in the refrigerator next to the milk. At work, I found myself repeating a story about a client to my desk neighbour, only to see her exchange a worried glance with the supervisor. I was terrified. I thought my mind was finally betraying me, that the sharp edges of my intellect were dulling into the soft, useless confusion of old age. Then Kayla arrived with the solution. It was a Tuesday evening, and she brought a sleek, amber glass bottle with a generic label that looked like it came from a boutique wellness shop. These are brain vitamins. Mom, she said, placing the bottle on my counter with a decisive thud. Everyone at the agency is taking them. They help with focus and memory. You have seemed so scattered lately. Just trust me. I trusted her. I wanted to believe that a simple capsule could fix the terrifying lapses in my memory. I started taking them every morning with my coffee. But instead of clearing, the fog grew thicker. My hands began to tremble. My balance felt off, as if the floor were constantly tilting 5 degrees to the left. 3 weeks after I started the regimen, I stood up from the toilet and the world went black. I woke up on the cold tile floor with blood sticky in my hairline and a throbbing pain above my left eyebrow. I had fallen and struck my head against the vanity. The emergency room was a blur of bright lights and hushed voices. When the doctor came in to stitch my forehead, Kayla was already there, standing by the bed with a look of practiced concern. Before I could speak, she leaned in toward the physician. "We are very worried about her cognitive state." "Doctor," she whispered, loud enough for me to hear, but soft enough to sound intimate. "She has been confused. She forgets where she is. We think maybe she shouldn't be driving anymore." I tried to protest, to say I just stood up too fast, but my tongue felt heavy and thick in my mouth. The doctor looked at me with pity, not as a patient to be treated, but as a problem to be managed. When I was discharged, Ethan drove me home. He sat at my kitchen table, twisting his wedding ring, refusing to meet my eyes. "Mum, we need to talk about the future," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Kayla and I have been looking into legal guardianship. It is just a precaution, a power of attorney. When you are no longer lucid, we can handle the paperwork. We can make sure you are safe." He used words like care plan and safety, but the underlying message was cold and sharp. They were preparing to take the wheel of my life because they had decided I was no longer capable of steering. The truth revealed itself 2 nights later. I was staying in their guest room while my head healed. I woke up at 2 a.m, my throat parched, and crept downstairs for a glass of water. The house was dark, but a sliver of light came from the kitchen island where Ethan and Kayla were standing. I froze on the bottom step, my hand gripping the banister. "If she gets the diagnosis of cognitive decline, the bank will be much easier to deal with," Kayla said, her voice low and urgent. "You can get power of attorney. We can freeze the accounts before she spends it on whatever. And the house? We can sell it before it loses more value. We can't let her refinance or do something stupid. It feels cruel." "Kayla," Ethan whispered, putting her in a home. "She loves that garden." "I am just protecting our future." Kayla hissed, the sweetness gone from her tone. "Do you want to pay for her mistakes for the next 20 years? She will be better off in a facility. High-end care. Not rotting in that old money pit of a house." I stood in the shadows, the cold from the wood seeping into my bare feet. I listened to them discuss my life as if it were a failing stock portfolio. I was not a mother to them. I was a financial burden. I was a liability they needed to liquidate. The next morning, I went into the kitchen when the house was empty. I took the amber bottle of brain vitamins from my purse. I did not take the pill. Instead, I wrapped the bottle in a pair of socks and hid it deep in the back of my underwear drawer. I poured my coffee and sat by the window. I did not take the pill that day, or the next. By the 3rd day, the trembling in my hands stopped. The fog in my brain lifted, revealing a sharp, crystalline clarity. I was not going senile. I was being poisoned. And as the strength returned to my legs, a cold, hard resolve settled in my heart. They wanted a helpless old woman. I would show them exactly what a helpless old woman could do. I took the amber bottle to the free clinic at the back of St. Jude's Church the very next morning. Dr. Patel, a young volunteer with tired eyes and a kind smile, agreed to run a chemical analysis on the capsules for me. I waited 3 days for the call. When my phone rang, I was standing in my kitchen, staring at the calendar where I used to mark family dinners. "Mrs. O'Connell," Dr. Patel said, his voice hesitant over the line. "These are not vitamins. The primary active ingredient is, well, it is a sedative, an antihistamine with strong drowsiness side effects. It is over the counter. But In this concentration, daily use would cause confusion, memory loss, and balance issues. I hung up the phone and felt a cold shiver run through my entire body. It was not just a mistake. It was a script. If I had continued taking those pills for another 3 months, I would have fit every criteria for early onset dementia. I would have been the confused, stumbling old woman Kayla needed me to be to justify putting me away. That afternoon, I made an appointment with Thomas Weller. A friend from the church choir had whispered his name to me, telling me he specialized in elder law and financial abuse. I walked into his office, a small room smelling of old paper and coffee, and for the first time in my life, I sat on the protected side of a mahogany desk. "We need to lock everything down." "Maggie," Thomas said, looking over my financial records. "If they file for guardianship, you need to be bulletproof." Under his guidance, I rewrote my will. We drafted a conditional power of attorney that explicitly stated neither Ethan nor Kayla could make decisions for me unless 2 independent neurologists chosen by my lawyer, not my family, declared me incapacitated. I opened a new bank account at a credit union across town, a place where Ethan had no contacts. I transferred my savings, $40,000, accumulated over decades of skipped vacations and bag lunches, into this secure vault. But legal protection was not enough. I needed eyes. I drove to an electronics store 2 towns over and bought 3 small cameras and a digital voice recorder. I felt ridiculous, like a character in a spy novel, as I hid the recorder on top of the kitchen cabinets and tucked the tiny cameras behind the cookbooks and the potted fern in the living room. To keep my mind sharp, I joined a writing workshop at the Riverton Second Act Centre. I walked into a room full of women who looked just like me, women with grey hair and invisible scars. We wrote about our lives. Writing gave me a voice I had suppressed for 37 years. When I read my first piece aloud, a story about a mother who gave too much, the woman next to me squeezed my hand. I realized I was not alone. I started to change. I cut my hair into a sharp, modern bob. I donated my old, frumpy cardigans and bought tailored blazers from a consignment shop. I started walking 3 miles every morning. When Kayla texted me commands disguised as suggestions, I stopped replying immediately. I reclaimed the space in my own head. Then came the recordings. I would listen to them late at night with headphones on. The audio was grainy, but the words were razor sharp. "She is looking better." "Ethan," Kayla's voice said on a recording from a Tuesday when they had stopped by unannounced. "Maybe the dose needs to be higher. We can't wait forever. The market is shifting, and we need the equity from this house by summer." "I don't know." "Kay," Ethan mumbled. "She seems happy. Maybe we should just let her be?" "Let her be?" Kayla scoffed. "And watch her spend our inheritance on what writing classes, useless hobbies. We have a plan. Ethan, stick to it." I took off the headphones. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so hot it felt like it could burn down the house. They were discussing my life, my hard-earned money, as if it were already theirs. I went to Thomas's office the next day with the USB drive in my hand. I placed it on his desk. "I have enough for a restraining order," Thomas said quietly. "We could go to the police now. Attempted poisoning. Conspiracy." I looked out the window at the busy street. Going to the police now would end it. Yes. But Kayla would spin a story. She would say it was a misunderstanding, that she was trying to help me sleep. She would cry. Ethan would defend her. I would just be the confused mother making wild accusations. No, I said, turning back to Thomas. Not yet. Maggie, Thomas warned, leaning forward. This is dangerous. You are playing with fire. I looked him in the eye, my voice steady and cold. If they see me as a pawn, then I can learn to play chess, I said. But I don't want a draw. Thomas, I want a checkmate. I want a game where the ending isn't just me surviving. I want an ending where they pay for every single move. When the HR department at Harbourlight Assurance announced they wanted to throw me a retirement party, the plan was modest. They suggested a sheet cake in the break room and a $50 gift card to a garden centre. It would have been perfectly adequate. But then, Kayla intervened. She stepped forward with a dazzling smile and insisted that a simple cake was an insult to my 37 years of service. She told Ethan she wanted to handle everything to make sure the evening was worthy of his mother. She took control of the budget and the logistics immediately. She booked the Lakeview Grand, a boutique hotel that cost more for one night than I earned in a month. She ordered imported champagne for a specific celebratory toast. To everyone else, she looked like the daughter-in-law of the century. To me, she looked like a predator setting a trap. The first crack in her facade appeared in an email. I was at Ethan's house one afternoon to drop off some mail that had been sent to my address by mistake. His laptop was open on the kitchen counter. I glanced at the screen and saw an email chain between Kayla and the event coordinator at the hotel. One line stood out in bold text: "Please ensure every guest has a designated glass with a name tag on the stem. We want it to feel personal." A cold chill went down my spine. At a party of 60 people, individual name tags on champagne flutes were not just a logistical nightmare, they were a targeting system. If you want to drug one specific person in a crowded room, you need to know exactly which glass is theirs. The confirmation came 2 days later. I was reviewing the footage from the camera I had hidden behind the spice rack in Ethan's kitchen. Kayla was pacing the room, her phone pressed to her ear. I don't want her to sleep. "Mark," she said, her voice impatient. "I need something that makes her lose control. Slurred speech, confusion. You know, something that makes her look like she has completely lost her mind or drunk too much. But by tomorrow morning, she just wakes up with a headache." I watched the video 3 times. She was ordering a chemical weapon from an old friend. I extracted the audio file and took it to Thomas. He listened to it in his office, his face growing pale. "Maggie, this is conspiracy to commit assault," he said, reaching for his desk phone. "We need to call the police right now. We have the recording." "No," I said, placing my hand over his. "If we call the police now, she will say she was joking. She will say she was talking about a prank. She will destroy the evidence, and Ethan will believe her because he wants to believe her. I need her to commit the act." Thomas looked at me as if I were a stranger. "You want to let her poison you? I want to let her try," I corrected him. "But I need witnesses, not just us. I need the law in the room." Thomas eventually agreed to bring a guest to the party. He called Lieutenant Ramirez, a detective he had worked with on fraud cases. Ramirez agreed to attend as a friend of the family, wearing a plain suit but carrying his badge and a very keen eye for criminal behavior. 3 days before the party, I went to Ethan's house for lunch. I excused myself to use the restroom and slipped into the master bedroom. I told them I needed to borrow a hairdryer. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I went straight to Kayla's vanity table. I opened the bottom drawer, pushing aside silk scarves and jewelry boxes. There, tucked inside a velvet pouch, was a small glass vial It had no label. The liquid inside was clear and innocent looking. I did not take it. If it went missing, she would panic and abort the plan. Instead, I pulled out my phone and took several high-resolution photos of the vial and its location. I showed the photos to Dr. Patel at the clinic later that afternoon. He looked at the shape of the vial and listened to my description of the conversation I had overheard. "If she got this from a pharmacist friend," Dr. Patel said, frowning, "it is likely a liquid benzodiazepine. In a high dose, mixed with alcohol, it would cause severe ataxia. You would stumble. You would slur your words. You wouldn't remember anything the next day. Anyone watching would think you were either severely intoxicated or suffering from a major neurological event, like dementia." I said. "Exactly," he replied. "It fits the narrative perfectly." I drove home in silence. The pieces were all there. She had the motive, the method, and the opportunity. She was going to humiliate me in front of my bosses, my colleagues, and my son to prove that I was incompetent. She wanted to strip me of my dignity so she could strip me of my assets. I parked my car in the driveway and looked at the steering wheel. I was terrified. Yes. But I was also ready. She had built a stage for my destruction, but she had forgotten one thing when the curtain rises. Everyone is watching, including the police. Thomas and I spent the final 48 hours building a fortress out of paper. The file sitting on his mahogany desk was nearly 2 inches thick. It contained everything. We had the chemical analysis of the fake vitamins from the clinic. We had the digital audio files on 3 separate flash drives. We had the high-resolution photographs of the unlabeled vial in Kayla's vanity drawer. We even had a printed copy of the email Kayla sent to the event coordinator, with the line about the name tags highlighted in yellow. Thomas pushed a document toward me. His face was grim, the lines around his mouth deep with concern. "This is the contingency. Maggie," he said, his voice low. If things go wrong tonight, if you actually drink that glass, or if they manage to get you out of that room before you can speak, I need you to sign this." I looked at the paper. It was an instruction to release the entire dossier to the Riverton Police Department and the Fraud Division at Harbour Light Assurance immediately upon my incapacitation. "You are telling me there is no turning back," I said. "I am telling you that you are walking into a lion's den with a stake tied to your chest," Thomas replied, leaning back. "I will be there. Ramirez will be there. But, Maggie, if you miss the switch, if you falter—" "I won't miss," I said, signing my name with a steady hand. I needed eyes inside the room before the party started. I reached out to Teresa, a young secretary in the claims department whom I had trained 5 years ago. I met her for coffee and asked for a favor that I knew sounded paranoid. I asked her to get me the seating chart and the floor plan of the ballroom. Teresa looked at the map spread out on the small cafe table. "Maggie, why does it matter which way your chair faces?" she asked, looking up at me with confusion. It's just a party. Humor an old woman. Teresa," I said, tapping a specific table near the northeast corner. "I just want to make sure I catch the light properly." We marked the spot. It was table 4. It was directly in the line of sight of the black dome security camera mounted above the emergency exit. I bought a new dress for the evening. It was a simple navy blue piece, elegant but understated. I spent the afternoon hemming it myself in my living room. Then, I stood in front of the full-length mirror. I practiced holding a champagne flute filled with water. I practiced the smile, the surprised, grateful smile of a retiring mother. Then I practiced the switch. I reached out, fumbled, bumped the glass, and swapped it with the imaginary one next to it. My hand shook the first 3 times. I dropped the glass into the sink once, shattering it. Get it together? Maggie, I whispered to my reflection. You have 1 shot. By the 5th try. The motion was fluid, invisible. Later that afternoon, I went to the church. I did not go to the confessional booth. I found Father Michael arranging candles near the altar. I told him what I was about to do. I did not ask for permission, and I did not ask for forgiveness. Father, I am not going there to hurt them, I said, wringing my hands. I am going there to show them who they are. Is that vengeance? Father Michael looked at me for a long time. Truth is the only form of justice we have in this life. Margaret, he said softly. If the truth destroys them, then they built their house on sand. That night, I sent a brief email to Ethan. I kept it vague. I hope we have a beautiful evening tomorrow. I also hope you are ready to hear a few things I need to say. I wanted him to be nervous. I wanted him to be watching me. I barely slept. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling fan. The doubt crept in like a cold draft. Was I really going to do this? Was I really going to publicly destroy my son's wife and likely ruin his career by association? Then I remembered the cold tile of the bathroom floor when I fell. I remembered the word guardianship. I remembered Kayla's voice saying we can't let her spend our inheritance. If I stayed silent, they would not stop. They would bury me while I was still breathing. On the morning of the party, I drove to the Lakeview Grand Hotel 5 hours early. I walked to the front desk and handed a thick, sealed envelope to the concierge. This is for a guest arriving later, Mr. Thomas Weller, I said. Please put it in the hotel safe. Do not give it to anyone else. It was the evidence. If they cornered me, if they stopped me. The truth was already in the building, locked in steel. I drove back home to get dressed, and then I drove back to the hotel as the sun was setting. My stomach was twisted in knots. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. But as I pulled into the valet parking and saw the valet open my door, a strange calm washed over me. I had walked into thousands of rooms in my life where I was expected to be invisible, to be the nice, quiet worker, the supportive mother. Tonight was different. I smoothed my dress and stepped out of the car. I walked into the lobby not as a victim, but as the only person who knew the rules of the game we were about to play. The guests arrived in a steady stream of handshakes and perfume. Ethan looked magnificent in his fitted charcoal suit, gliding between the groups of people with the ease of a man who believes he controls the room. He introduced Kayla to everyone, his hand resting proudly on the small of her back. Kayla is really the soul of this party. I heard him tell the regional vice president. She wanted everything to be perfect for Mom. I stood in the corner near the floral arrangement, clutching a bouquet of white roses that felt heavy and funereal in my arms. I smiled until my cheeks ached. Maggie Jim from the underwriting department clapped a hand on my shoulder. I don't know what we are going to do without you. You have a memory like a steel trap. 37 years, and I don't think you ever forgot a single claim number. I tried my best. Jim, I said. Tried, he laughed. You were the only one who knew where the files from 98 were. Enjoy the rest. You are sharper than any of us. His words were meant to be kind, but they twisted in my gut. He saw a sharp, capable woman. Kayla saw a liability that needed to be erased. The lights dimmed slightly, and Kayla stepped up to the small podium. She looked radiant, her diamond earrings catching the light. She tapped the microphone, drawing silence from the room. "We stand on the shoulders of giants," she began, her voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. "But even giants need to rest. Tonight is about honoring the past, so the future can take care of everything else." It was a masterful performance. She was framing my forced obsolescence as a benevolent act of care. As the applause rippled through the room, the banquet staff brought out the silver trays of champagne. I watched Kayla step down from the podium and intercept the waiter heading toward our table. "No, no," she said loud enough for the table to hear. "Let me serve Mom myself. It is only right." She took the tray. She turned her back to the room, shielding the glasses with her body as she pretended to adjust a napkin. I looked up. The black dome of the security camera above the emergency exit was unblinking. I knew exactly what it was seeing. In the reflection of the dark window across the room, I saw her hand dip into her clutch. It was fast. A quick uncorking. A splash of liquid into the glass with the tag that read Maggie, and a seamless return of the vial to her bag. Time seemed to warp. The seconds stretched out, thick and viscous like syrup. She turned around, the perfect smile plastered on her face, holding the tray out to me. "For you, Mom," she said, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "To your retirement." The glass with my name, the poisoned chalice, was closest to me. The safe glass was next to it. I reached out. "Oh, thank you, dear," I said, letting my voice waver. As my hand neared the glass, I let a spasm run through my wrist. I feigned a stumble, my fingers knocking against the rim of the tainted glass. "Oh, I am so clumsy," I cried out softly. In the confusion of the fumble, my hand bypassed the intended glass and grabbed the stem of the one beside it. I laughed a breathless, embarrassed laugh that made the people at the table smile in sympathy. "I am just so overwhelmed," I added. Kayla's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, but she had to react. She could not make a scene. She reached out and took the remaining glass, the one with the tag Maggie, to steady the tray. "It's okay, Mum," she said, her voice tight. "Just relax." Ethan raised his glass. "To Mom, to Maggie," the room echoed. I brought the safe champagne to my lips and took a tiny sip over the rim of my glass. I watched Kayla. She took a long, generous swallow of the champagne meant for me. "Mom," Ethan said, handing me the microphone. "Why don't you say a few words?" I took the microphone. My hand was steady now. I looked at Kayla. She was smiling, waiting for the drugs to hit me. She was waiting for me to slur, to stumble, to prove her narrative right. "Thank you, Ethan," I said, my voice clear and resonant. "I have spent 37 years analyzing risk. I have learned that the biggest dangers often come from the places we feel safest." I saw Kayla blink. She brought a hand to her forehead. A small frown appeared between her brows. "I have loved this company," I continued, locking eyes with her. "And I have loved my family. Sometimes, love requires us to make hard choices. Sometimes, it requires us to open our eyes to things we would rather not see." Kayla let out a sudden, high-pitched giggle. It was loud and out of place. She covered her mouth, but her eyes were already glazing over. "Oh, that is so Deep. Maggie, she said, her words slurring together. So boring. Ethan turned to look at her, confused. Kayla, I'm not drunk, she announced to the room, though no one had asked. She swayed dangerously in her chair, the empty glass tilting in her hand. I kept speaking, my voice calm, contrasting perfectly with the woman next to me who was rapidly losing her grip on reality. The game was in motion, and she was falling apart exactly as she had planned for me. Kayla's laughter turned into a high-pitched, jagged sound that cut through the polite murmur of the room. She leaned heavily against the table, waving a hand dismissively at the board of directors. Look at them, she slurred, her head lolling to the side. A room full of dusty old files. You all look exactly the same. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. Ethan's face flushed a deep crimson. He grabbed her arm, his whisper harsh and frantic. Kayla, stop it. You have had too much to drink. Sit down. I am not drunk. Ethan, she snapped, pulling away with clumsy force. I am just honest. Finally. I gripped the microphone tighter. My knuckles were white, but my voice remained steady as I addressed the room. This is my retirement party, I said, my voice projecting clearly over the commotion. And perhaps it is also the night I stop pretending that everything is fine. The room fell into a dead silence. Even the clinking of silverware stopped. I gestured to the waiter who was still holding the tray near our table. Please, I said to him, bring that tray here. Yes. The one with the 2 empty glasses? He hesitated, then stepped forward. I pointed a steady finger at the 2 flutes. 2 glasses? I announced, looking directly at Ethan. Both have the same shade of lipstick on the rim. My shade, because we switched glasses. Ethan. Just a little game I decided to play. Thomas stepped out from the shadows of the back tables. He walked with the authority of a man who owns the courtroom. I am Thomas Weller, legal counsel for Mrs. O'Connell, he announced, his voice booming. He nodded to a man in a grey suit standing by the door. Lieutenant Ramirez, if you would please secure that tray as evidence. We have reason to believe the glass Mrs. Ethan O'Connell just drained contains a high dose of liquid benzodiazepine. Ethan stared at Thomas, then at me, his eyes wide with confusion and rising anger. What is this? Ethan demanded. Mom, a lawyer. Kayla is just wasted. You are humiliating her. She is not wasted. Ethan, I said coldly, she is poisoned. By her own hand. I pulled a remote from my pocket and pointed it at the large projection screen that had been set up for my retirement slideshow. The image changed. It was no longer a photo of me at the company picnic. It was a screenshot of an email. This is the email Kayla sent to the event coordinator. I narrated, my tone clinical, highlighting her request for named glasses to ensure the target received the specific dose. The image changed again. A photo of the unlabeled vial in Kayla's drawer. Then a transcript of the recording from her phone call with the pharmacist. And this, I continued, is the unlabeled vial I found in her vanity. The one she discussed using to make me appear incompetent, to make me look like I had dementia so you could secure guardianship of my assets. Kayla tried to stand up, knocking her chair over with a loud crash. She pointed a shaking finger at me. She is paranoid, Kayla screamed, but the words dragged like heavy stones. You old hag, I didn't. The drug causes confusion, I said, looking at my former colleagues who were watching in horrified fascination. Slurred speech, loss of motor control. Exactly what you are seeing right now. She intended for you to see me like this. She intended for you to pity Ethan for having a senile mother. Stop it, Ethan shouted, stepping between me and his wife. This is insane. You are making this up because you hate her. Lieutenant Ramirez stepped forward, his badge now clearly visible on his belt. Mr. O'Connell, Ramirez said, his voice level. We have court-admissible audio recordings of your wife purchasing the sedative. We have the lab results of the pills she gave your mother last month. And the hotel security has already confirmed they have footage of the switch. Ethan froze. He looked at Ramirez, then back at Kayla, who was now giggling uncontrollably while tears streamed down her face. Ethan. Kayla moaned, grabbing his lapel. Everything is spinning. Make it. Stop. I reached into my purse and pulled out the thick envelope Thomas and I had prepared. I walked over to Ethan and pressed it against his chest. It is all in here. Ethan, I said softly. The dates, the times, the chemical analysis of the so-called brain vitamins she made me take, the ones that made me fall in the bathroom. Ethan looked down at the envelope, then up at me. The anger drained from his face, replaced by a dawn of horrific realization. He looked at the woman hanging off his arm, the woman he had defended for a year, and then he looked at the scar on my forehead, hidden by my makeup. You knew, he whispered. I had to know. I replied. Because you refused to see. I turned my gaze to Kayla. She had slumped into a chair, her head lolling back, her eyes unable to focus. If you only wanted me to move into a nursing home, Kayla, you could have spoken to me like a human being, I said, my voice devoid of pity. We could have discussed it. But you chose to try to steal my mind. You chose to make me crazy with drugs. And tonight, that very drug is speaking for the rest of us. Kayla let out a low groan and slid sideways, collapsing onto the carpet in a heap of expensive silk. The room was silent, save for the hum of the projector fan. Ethan stood over her, his hands trembling, looking at his mother with the terrified eyes of a child who realizes the monsters were real all along, and he had been sleeping next to one. The party ended not with music, but with the sterile squeak of shoes on tile as the police escorted Kayla to the hotel medical suite for preliminary questioning. Lieutenant Ramirez stood by the door, his arms crossed, while Thomas acted as the legal witness. The ballroom emptied in an uncomfortable, heavy silence. My colleagues, people I had shared coffee with for decades, looked at me differently as they collected their coats. I was no longer just the nice lady from the filing department. I was someone who had just taken down a predator without raising her voice. By the next morning, the local news ran a vague story about a disturbance at a corporate event involving a possible poisoning, but names were withheld. Harbour Light Assurance moved even faster. To avoid a public relations nightmare, the board offered me an immediate retirement package that was nearly double what I had originally accrued. I took the money. I had earned every single cent of it. 3 days later, Ethan came to my house. He looked 10 years older. His shirt was wrinkled, and he smelled of stale coffee. He sat at my kitchen table, wringing his hands, trying to navigate the wreckage of his life. Mom, she didn't mean to hurt you, he stammered, his eyes red. She panicked. She thought you were unwilling to accept help. She wanted to show everyone that you needed care. She is so sorry. I sat opposite him, my posture straight. I did not offer him tea. I did not reach out to hold his hand. "Ethan," I said, my voice calm. "She drugged me. She planned it for weeks. Do not confuse panic with malice." I slid the copy of the legal file Thomas and I had compiled across the table. "I have protected myself, and I will continue to do so," I told him. "The courts will handle her punishment. But your part is to go home and ask yourself why it took a team of lawyers and a police detective for you to believe your own mother." The legal process was swift. Confronted with the recordings and the lab results, Kayla's lawyer advised her to take a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to assault and exploitation of a vulnerable adult. She avoided prison time, receiving a suspended sentence and 3 years of probation. But the felony conviction shattered her life. Her marketing career was over. No reputable firm would hire a brand specialist with a record of poisoning her mother-in-law. Ethan suffered too. The scandal cost him his lead position on a major project, and he was quietly moved to a back-office role with no direct reports. He had let his wife manipulate him into almost stripping his mother of her freedom, and the shame of that realization seemed to weigh on him more than the demotion. In our final conversation about the incident, he asked me the question I knew was coming. "Mom, is there—" He paused, his voice breaking. "Is there still a place for me here? Can we fix this? I am not closing the door." "Ethan," I said, looking at him with a sadness that felt ancient, "but that door is no longer wide open unconditionally. You have to knock first, and you have to learn to walk through it as a man, not as a son who expects me to bleed for him." I used the settlement money to renovate my house in Northwood Heights. I installed new windows, a modern kitchen, and a beautiful garden patio where I could write. But my biggest act of reclaiming my life was in the paperwork. I updated my will. I set up a trust that would direct 80% of my assets to a scholarship fund for older women returning to education. Ethan would receive a small, conditional inheritance. It was a silent, long-term reminder that my legacy belonged to me, not to those who waited for me to die. 6 months later, I stood at a podium at the Second Act Center. I read my story to a room full of strangers. I did not use real names, but I told the truth about the woman who refused to be erased. When I finished, the applause was warm and genuine. A group of women approached me afterward, thanking me for saying the things their children did not want to hear. That night, I went home to my quiet, safe house. I opened a bottle of expensive red wine, one I had bought just for myself. I poured a glass and held it up to the light, watching the liquid ruby shimmer. This time, I whispered to the empty room, "I poured this myself, and no one has the right to touch it." I brought the glass to my lips and took a long, slow sip. It tasted like grapes, oak, and absolute freedom. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop your location in the comments below so we can connect. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help get this story out to more people.